In this video, I'm going to go through all the different features and tabs of the AFL Prop Tool and show you how to use them, how to understand what you're seeing, and then ultimately how to use this to help you make better decisions when you're betting. This is going to be quite a long video as I'm going to do quite an in-depth overview of everything. But if there's anything you want me to go any deeper on, let me know and I can make a separate video specifically targeting that tool. So let's get straight into it. So the first thing I want to look at is the main dashboard, the player dashboard, and this would be the key thing you will use to kind of do any of your research. And essentially it visualizes the player's data over the last whatever time period you've inputted. So for right now, we're just looking at 2025. And you have the data nicely visualized here, and you kind of see how they perform against the line that you can toggle here. When you toggle this line, this will show you the best price that's available. And it will also show you kind of the implied probabilities based on the hit rate. So this is for last season, for 20 disposals, Chad Warner hit it 74% of the time with an implied odds of 135. And you can see you can get 140 at the bookie right now. And then you can also just quickly toggle this for last 10 or last 5 if you want to look at it. Now, the other quick visualizing tools you can use here is clicking on the average. And it's just trying to show you the average as how it changes throughout the year. And then also the median. And kind of looking at how the median sits in relation to the average is really interesting. A lot of footy stats are quite low variance. And so the median can be a better value to use when comparing against a line. Because we're looking at kind of hit rates over that median. And the difference between the median and the average and kind of can suggest a bit of volatility in a certain player's results. We've also then got the standard deviation, rolling five-game standard deviation. And so this can kind of just help you show you where there might be some volatility in a player's profile. And if it's smaller, it also suggests that there is less volatility, and that means previous player performance data is actually more predictive. And so this is quite a useful tool just to kind of help you get a better understanding of the trends of the data. Then the next thing I want to show you is kind of the different filters you can apply to what the data you're seeing here. So you can kind of toggle in and out finals, and I think probably good to toggle off finals just because finals footy can be quite significantly different to regular season footy. You can choose to add in more seasons. You can toggle for home and away, toggle for wins, toggle for games at a specific ground, toggle for against a specific opponent, different weather conditions, whether it's a good matchup, and this is based on defense versus precision metrics, which we'll show you in a second, and then also a tough matchup with plays, without plays. This can be really useful if there's certain players who are in the squad or who are out of the squad who would make a specific impact on Chad Warner. As an example, whether when he plays with Goulden, what happens? Or if there's a key player who's out of the squad, you want to kind of look at his data without that player. You use these toggles, what you'll see is, so when you toggle this off, this is showing the summary stats for what you're seeing on the screen. And when you toggle and you add a filter, now it's showing you what you're seeing on the screen. And the numbers below are showing you the difference between the baseline, which is without the filter, and with the filter. So at home, Chad Warner was averaging 0.8 disposals. And here's where you can see some interesting trends in certain filters. The other filter that I'd like to show you is the stat filter. And so this can be really helpful if you're analyzing a certain hypothesis, whether that is for Chad Warner as an example. What happens when he attends more than 50% of CBAs? And you kind of get the data for that, and you can see the difference in the stats up here. But there's a whole bunch of different stats that you can filter by, which are really interesting to kind of analyze all the different factors of the game. Okay, now I want to go to the tabs below here. So the first one is just looking at a quick summary of form, which is pretty self-explanatory. Then we've also got some splits, and I think the split data is quite useful. So the first one is looking at match result splits. So you can see in wins and losses, and also in close games and blowouts, which can be super useful for certain players who are prone to being in a blowout game. Your Richmonds and West Coast for this year, seeing what happens in those games to players' stats. You've also got location and venue, and these can be really helpful for identifying certain grounds that have a unique play factor, whether that's Marvel or grounds that are different shape sizes, or for interstate players, how they fare versus home versus away. Weather is also really an interesting one, particularly rainy. Kind of just seeing how players perform in rainy conditions can always be an interesting edge to look at. Matchup quality, this is probably one of my favorite ones. I think this is really interesting when you can find some quite unique data trends. One that I would like to show you is looking at Jeremy Cameron. So if we look at Cameron last year, you can see he significantly overperformed in good matchups. So these would be good matchups to key forwards. And in tough matchups to key forwards, he performed significantly worse. So that'd be a really helpful thing to know when betting on Jeremy Cameron. And then there's season stage and rest days as well to look at. We've also got this teammates impact, and this kind of shows you a summary for one player, how they perform with different teammates who are in and out of the team. And again, this is going to be a really quick way to spot any interesting insights. And so one insight that I thought was interesting last year was for Tom Powell. And I noticed that with George Wardlaw, he had 10 missed games, and there was a significant boost in his performance when Wardlaw was out. And so this is just something that would be something that you might want to use when you're betting to identify which players have a big impact on certain players. And then lastly, we've got time on ground trends. And this is really good to quickly visualize any patterns or trends in time on ground, particularly with the extra play on the bench this year. That might have a big impact on some time on ground for certain players. And then you kind of also have this normalized per 100% time on ground to be able to better understand what a player would do if they got more time on ground, or if they got less. You can kind of flex up their stats or flex down. So that's a quick summary of the player page. Now we're looking at the hit rates page. So the hit rates page is showing you all the different hit rates for different matches. And it's just a quick way to visualize all the different hit rates for common milestones. You can toggle for the different stats here. And you can also toggle for different venues and matchups as well. I like to also keep this 50% toggle on because you kind of don't want to evaluate games where players got injured or where they were the sub last year. And now that bookies are starting to release more than just these milestones, if you want to look at a custom milestone, you can just add in that number here. So if you want to look at 12 plus, you can kind of just add it in and see the numbers. If you want to look at 27 plus, it will instantly calculate those hit rates for you as well. Okay, now I want to show you the match hub. So the match hub is showing you a high-level overview of the matchup and just some interesting data points you want to look at. So the first is looking at just team stats overall, and often this is just a good way to get a sense of how the game might look, and you can target certain players based on the overall team stats or what the team give up against. This tab is showing you the notable player matchups, so this is also pulling in from our DVP page, which we'll go into a bit more detail in a second. But we categorize players into different archetypes or positions. And then this is showing you players who have a really good matchup, means DVP rank 1s means that defender generals average the most disposals against Richmond. And then this is the DVP rank 17 would be a hard matchup. This is saying that defender keys against Carlton average the 17th least, or the second worst disposals. And so you can toggle for the stats here, and just give you a quick look at players who may be good to target. The player splits tab shows you player splits against a certain opponent or against at certain venues, and you can click into the player to view the data in a bit more detail. The form and head-to-head tab just show you the recent game data, pull in some betting data as well, and do some projections based on that. And we also do something similar with the totals here, where we're pulling in total points data using some form and projection methodologies to estimate what the score may be. And then lastly, we have this projections tab, which blends different sorts of data, so season data, recent form, home and away, and other contextual inputs to generate a projected score. And then we can compare this with the current line in the market and highlight whether there may be an edge based on that sort of analysis. Okay, next I want to go into the analysis tab, and we've got a bunch of different stuff here. So the first tab is the DVP tab. And so this is super helpful to give you a sense of which positions or position archetypes perform well against which teams. And so these columns are all filterable, so you can kind of see which teams are good and which teams are hard to score against. And then it also gives you a sense of the color coding, green being easy, red meaning hard. You can look at the data as raw data, so this is just raw averages, or look at the differential between the players' average and what they got, which I kind of like to look at because I think it removes any sort of nuance that could occur from game to game. Now, if you want to go deeper, you can also click into the cell, and what that will do is it will pop up all the different defender ball users against Richmond and show you their stats. And since we're highlighted disposals here, it's kind of just showing you which ones perform significantly better or worse. And you get a good sense of, okay, what type of players do well against this team. You're able to filter this for the season, for the different stats, for the different rounds. If you want to look at a more recent DVP, which can be quite useful because definitely throughout the year, teams do go on in trends. And so certain teams were really loose at giving up possessions to a certain position at the start of the year, and that might change throughout the year. And again, you can kind of add this 50% tog to remove any, players who you don't want to include in the calculation. Something that's new for this year is that we've added this custom positions database where you can make a decision about if you want to change someone's position. There's over 400, 500 plays that we're doing, and every year there's so many changes, and even throughout the year there are changes. And so sometimes you may have a different opinion to us, and now you can just make the decision yourself and come in here and override the position to whatever you think it is. So if you wanted to change Cadman to a forward general because you think that better suits his style of play this year, then you can just do that in the customs positions page. You can also revert that if you want to change your mind as well. And then if you want to go deeper, you can classify the whole list into your own classifications, and you're able to generate a new position if you would like. So if you go to settings, you can add a new position. So I've added, as an example, this exclude category because I think they might be sometimes useful to certain players that you might want to exclude from the calculation. Maybe that's because throughout the year they've changed roles so much that they don't really fit into one category, or maybe that they're just insignificant that you don't want them a part of that category, or you don't think they fit that category super well. You can kind of put them into this exclude bucket where you don't really have them mess up that calculation for you. Okay, next on the analysis is the CBA kick-in and rock data. This is mainly informational, but helps you get a sense of, okay, are there any things changing in here? Because again, CBA attendance is a super hard predictor for disposals for fantasy. And so when players' roles changing, this is a super important thing to keep an eye on. So we show this broken down round by round and then show you an average for the year. And so we've got that for CBAs, for kick-ins, and also for rock contests as well. And you're able to select which team you're looking at as well. Next is stat leaders. So this is a quick way to view team level data, organize it from best to worst, have the against data as well, which is really useful when you're evaluating different player props. Team stats is just another visualization of the team's data, and you can kind of cut it by different venue data, players in and out, certain opponents, win-loss, home away, time around 50, greater than 50%. And what you will see is when you cut it by, so let's just go analyze. So you can cut it by different data to quickly get an overview of which players may perform worse or better in certain situations. So if we look at Brisbane and you can say at the Gabba, you can quickly visualize, based on the color coding, okay, this, Hugh McCluggage actually performed a little worse at the Gabba, but someone like Will Ashcroft performed significantly better. And just a quick way to kind of visualize certain trends in data, but cut by these different variables. And then we've also got the box score. And so this is just a quick way if you want to have a look at a certain game from a certain season, you can select the season, the team, the round, and then select the match. And that's going to give you the full box score so that you can get that information if you wanted it. Okay, next we're going to look at the tools tab. And so this tools tab has some really interesting and unique stuff. So the first one is the AI Insight. And so this is a custom AI model that we've trained to ingest all the game log data and to extract relevant insights that may be helpful in identifying edges for betting. These are not all recommendations to bet, but they can be really good starting points for research to go a bit further and to validate the findings. We will be continually working on this model throughout the year and making it better and better so that it finds more and more value. We've also been working on some projections that are going to be helpful to look at, just to give you a better sense of what might be happening with a player. And so these projections are weighted on season form, last five average, opponent, and venue adjustments. So these can be super helpful to just validate your research or give you some quick little things to look at before you bet. And you can look at the projections to where the market's at and see if there's any significant differences there. The next tool we have is the Bet Finder. And so what this does is it looks at implied data, so historical data, and just surfaces bets that have a really high value based on the historical data to the price. Now, these all still need to be validated, as historical data can be misleading at times, but these can be great to help you find value in same-game multis. And so you can either search for certain plays if you wanted to, and just get all their games, or you can filter for specific matches, specific teams, look at just certain stats. If you just want to look at over bets, and then you can select, okay, let's say the min edge is 20% and the min hit rate is 50%, and that's going to generate you some nice options. Lastly, you can also filter for odds. If you only want to look at shorties, maybe you set the max to $1.80, and then that gives you some like good short price legs that have value when you compare to the historical data. And then this multi-generator will help you just pick random legs and make them into a multi. So let's just say we want to look at PointsBet and generate. This is going to generate you some nice same-game multis for PointsBet that have a really good historical precedence. And then there's also the player correlations tool. And so and this is really helpful for same-game multis. So when we're doing same-game multis, we want to try and get particularly if we're using the bonus bet arbitrage, we want to try and get as much edge in our side as possible to be as profitable in the long run. And so when we've got two players who play in the same team, we want to be aware of the correlations between those two players' stats. We are also able to toggle this to increase the number of games played, and you probably want at least 10 games played for that correlation to be somewhat relevant. If you're playing two players from the same team in the same game multi, it's good to know what the correlations are for their stats. If you click the key findings, it will just show you which players are highly correlated or not so correlated for certain disposal categories. And then you can click into the cell to get a bit more of a deep dive. So if we just take a look at this Adelaide as an example, and if this is a negative correlation, then we kind of want to avoid playing both players overs. And so one of these examples was Michaelani and Thilthorpe. And so I noticed that this was negative 0.57. And so you can click into this and you can kind of see that these stats move in opposite directions. When Michaelani's disposals are up, Thilthorpe's disposals tend to be down. And so you kind of want to avoid combining those in the same game multi because you might be getting worse value than you think when you put them together in a multi. Another example, if we just look at Fremantle, and we can take a look at Brayshaw. We can take a look at Brayshaw and Sarong. So you can see there's quite a strong correlation between those two. And so this kind of indicates that in good games, they both move together, and in other games, they don't. So playing them both overs actually is not such a bad idea, because when they do well, they both do well. And so this can just help you provide extra context when putting together your same game multis. Okay, the last tab here is just the context tab. And so this is kind of just looking at different game situations. So here we're looking at by the positional archetype. So here we're looking at venue. And so you can kind of look at which defender ball users perform best at certain venues. And you can toggle that for any of these positions. Be wary, though, of some stadiums that only have a small sample size. It's kind of hard to read into that without too much extra data, but it can be quite a helpful information to look at. And then at the bottom of the page, you can also just look at how the specific position archetype has performed at whatever ground you want to choose. Let's just take a look at MCG, and you just get a good sense of, you can just see all the previous performances there. And this is the very same tool with the weather, except now instead of cutting it by the stadiums, we're cutting it by different weather types, and you can also look at how different positions have performed in the different weather type matches. So that's a quick overview of the AFL Prop Tool. If you have any questions, feel free to DM us. We're always happy to chat and show you how you can use it to start making money in the AFL this year.